reelected by President Barack Obama as a White House champion of change for exemplary municipal work for integrating immigrant and refugee communities. The accolades of Mayor Pro Tem Higgins are abundant, and our program simply does not permit time for such a reading. Therefore, without further ado, I present to you our moderator for race, sports, and politics, another Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated woman of first, Alvina Higgins. Welcome.
Dr. Parrish, thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm so happy to be here with everyone today for this very, very important discussion about race, sports, and politics. And we have some fantastic panelists that are going to be presenting and talking with us today. As you know, we're going through some great upheaval across the United States right now. Our social and racial climate is such that we need to be having as many productive and informative conversations as we can about everyone's lived experiences here in the United States of America. And many times the African-American experience will be shared but misunderstood. And so I am so very happy that we're going to have some panelists here today to talk to us about how race and sports and politics, how those areas intersect. I'm sorry, can everyone hear me okay? Oh, okay. All right. And so there's so many examples out there. I mean, there are people who have been just major role models for us. Not only did they persevere through adversity, but they also served as role models for all Americans, not just Black Americans. We had the great Jesse Owens, Muhammad Ali, who's one of my favorites, Tommy Smith, one that's very recent, Colin Kaepernick. We have seen the backlash that occurred against Colin Kaepernick because he took a knee. There's been so much misunderstanding around why he took a knee. But we see that there are other athletes across the country from different areas of sports who have also been taking a knee to lift up why equity and these conversations are so important. So as we consider these contributions that sports have made to our society, we have three very special and distinguished guests who will share with us their perspectives and experiences. Our first panelist is Dr. Mamadou Christopher Taylor. He is a 2012 graduate of Livingstone College, where he majored in history and was an all CIAA student athlete in football and captain of the Honda Campus All-Star Challenge Quiz Bowl. Currently, he is the co-curricular assistant to the vice president of student affairs at Bowie State University in Bowie, Maryland, and he serves as an adjunct professor at Wheeling University, where among his courses taught is history of the African-American experience in sports. Hello, Dr. Taylor, how are you? Great to see you here today.
Thank you, glad to be here.
Also a Livingstonian, we have Coach Shannon Allen. And Coach Allen is a 2011 graduate who has earned a Master's of Legal Studies in NCAA Compliance and Sports Law from Drexel University. Coach Allen serves as the head volleyball coach for Livingstone College, where she once held the record for the number of assists, and where she served on the CIAA's all-tournament team. A proud member of the Oxford Henderson chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Look, I'm not gonna hold that against you. Hello, sister. Coach Allen is an advocate for progression in women and girls. Hello, Coach Allen, how are you?
Hello, I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. Lastly, Dr. Charles Pickney is professor of psychology at Livingstone College, who has always remained committed to his inherent love of sports, wearing several leadership hats, such as the president of the Center Intercollegiate Athletic Association, which is the CIAA, Faculty Athletic Representative Association, Faculty Athletic Representative of the National Collegiate Athletic Association, and chair of the Athletic Academic Committee. Dr. Pickney has worked extensively to improve the academic success rates of African-American student athletes and to increase the mental health awareness. Moreover, Dr. Pickney's first book, entitled From Slave Ships to Scholarships, The Plight of the Black Athlete, provides a rich historical context of African-American athletic experiences and their many accomplishments. Welcome, Dr. Pickney. I think you're muted.
Thank you.
Yes, glad to have you here today.
My pleasure.
we're going to start this session with a presentation by Dr. Mamadou. Dr. Mamadou Taylor. Dr. Taylor, thank you. And I can't wait to see your presentation. So I'm going to let you take it away.
All right, well, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Everybody can see me. Moment. Can move some things around. All right, so first I want to say thank you to everybody involved in making this possible. I'm really excited to be part of this big read, as well as, with the National Endowment for the Arts. We want to thank Salisbury, Rowan County Public Schools, and especially Livingstone College for being the venue today. And if I'm leaving anybody out, I do apologize. But, just looking at what we're going to be doing today, it's a conversation about the relevance of Jack Johnson in American sports and society. And I think the book, The Big Smoke, as well as thinking about the Ken Burns documentary, Unforgivable Blackness, is really going to help steer our conversation today. So go ahead and get started. To give you a little bit of context, in 2018, President Donald J. Trump, the former president, 45, he pardoned Jack Johnson. And some people didn't know anything about it. They're like, what did he get pardoned for? They had no idea. And so this was back in 2018, he got pardoned. But the story of Jack Johnson had been around for a long time. People knew about Jack Johnson from the 1970s 1970 with, I'm at a loss for his name right now. But you see our favorite man, Zamunga, the father.
James Earl Jones.
Thank you. I'm having that mind thing right now. James Earl Jones, 1970. He played him on stage as well as in the movie, The Great White Hope. And it was everywhere. It was a big production. James Earl Jones. I got the name right there. I had my visual cue ready. But, the crime that Johnson was convicted of was something that we would look at today and say, that sounds crazy. There was an act called the Mann Act that became law in 1910. And immediately after it had been made law, the federal investigations, U.S. Department of Justice started looking into Jack Johnson, trying to find a way to get him on something. And the law made it a felony to transport any woman or girls for the purposes of prostitution or debauchery or for any immoral purpose. Now, the woman that Johnson was convicted about was Lucille Cameron. And this woman was his wife later on that year. But they decided to get him for something. So people wonder sometimes, what they hate Jack Johnson so much for? And to understand the history of Jack Johnson, you got to understand that he set the template for the flamboyant athlete that you see today. Nowadays, you see athletes showing off all the money and riches on Instagram, social media, and we think that's normal. And, back then, though, in early 1900s, when Jack Johnson was coming up at the beginning of the 19th century, end of the 19th century, all these different things were going on. It's like, well, wait a second, this is out of the norm. Why are you so cocky? Why you got gold teeth in your mouth? Why you walking around in all these suits and got all these women? And think about it, it wasn't just any woman. It was that he was walking around with white women. And this was offensive to the whole society at this time. I mean, Jack Johnson won fights and people were killed as a result. Black person was celebrating on a train, got stabbed in the neck because they hated Jack Johnson so bad. And so I think that, what I'm trying to do today is give you Jack Johnson in context as a preface, if you will, for this greater story of African Americans in sports. And I think our author, Adrian Watika, will give us a little glimpse into Jack Johnson.
Gold smile. It's got an epigraph from Shakespeare. Teeth hadst thou in thy head when thou was born, to signify thou camest to bite the world. It's from Henry VI. I should probably mention right now that Jack Johnson had gold teeth. I guess that would help. Gold smile. They call teeth dent in France, and the name makes sense the way teeth do what they do to bacon and shoulders and cakes. The French word for gold is or, so when the folks in Paris describe my smile, it sounds like what happens when I punch a door. Dent's door. Dense door, the French children say when I open wide. Dense door, Etta says when she locks herself in the powder room. Tommy Burns said dense door when I was hooking him into asking for forgiveness. His people back in Canada would have said the same exact thing if they were in Sydney to witness our spectacle. Before we got into the ring, I told Tommy the only reason I got these gold uppers was to make every bite of my food twice as expensive.
Okay, so moving forward a little bit to talk about my research on this. I wrote my dissertation about Muhammad Ali, and I talked about him in terms of boxing, politics, cultural identity, and transformational leadership. But when I was doing this research, what I found was that this story about Muhammad Ali was not merely about him. To understand Ali, you had to understand African-American culture. You had to understand the culture of sport in America. You had to understand the story of Joe Louis. You had to understand Jack Johnson, who came before him. And what was really interesting was that Jack Johnson set the tone for each of these boxers after him. He really was Papa Jack, as some books have been entitled. And one of the things I found most interesting, it was a piece by Ishmael Reed in the book, The Complete Muhammad Ali. He said, to be frank, many African-Americans lionize Joe Louis and Jack Johnson because they beat the living daylights out of white people. It was as though their fists made up for all of the hate, spite, and insults suffered by Blacks at the hands of whites in everyday life. And you know me, I'm big on definitions. I love to understand what words mean. I love to understand and expand my vocabulary. And so when I looked up lionize, I said, okay, give a lot of public attention, approval, treat as a celebrity. You're glorifying, you're exalting, you're exclaiming, admiring this person. Joe Louis had that effect when he beat Max Schmeling. Not only did he defeat the German, he defeated fascism. He was a symbol greater than himself. And Jack Johnson, as he defeated Jim Jeffries, he defeated Tommy Burns before that, and a number of other contenders, all of them trying to be the great white hope. He was lionized because he was larger than himself. And the class I teach over at Wheeling University is talking about all of these African Americans in sports who have become larger than themselves. And just give you a brief synopsis of this class that I'm teaching, because I really, like I said, think that Johnson is the preface for the rest of this history. There's a guy who teaches over at George Mason University by the name of David Wiggins. And he wrote this book called More in the Game. And he goes through these 8 various chapters. One talking about establishing the boundaries of sport and slavery's lasting legacy. There was a lot of boxing, a lot of jockeying, a lot of other things going on during slavery. And that's part of the African-American experience. But Jack Johnson from Galveston, Texas, he comes up right after this. And in the same vein, you have the Negro Leagues. You had people like Marshall Taylor, Major Taylor, Hall Robeson, Isaac Murphy, Fritz Pollard. You had all these guys that were pioneers of African-American sports. Even our own CIAA. In chapter 3, Wiggins talks about it, how it really was a product of segregation, a product of us having to compete when we weren't allowed to compete elsewhere. Joe Louis, Jesse Owens, competing against the forces of fascism while in a segregated society. Then the reintegration of sport with Jackie Robinson in basketball, all these different things. And one thing that was huge in this chapter was the impact of the Black media. Newspapers like the Chicago Defender that were really pushing the narrative that African Americans were just as good as anyone else. And then we all know about the Civil Rights Movement. I mean, we mentioned it earlier about Tommy Smith and John Carlos, Muhammad Ali, Arthur Ashe, all these gentlemen like Jim Brown, who all came together, Will Chamberlain, all these gentlemen were, they were voicing their opinions in ways that in the past, like under under Joe Louis, as well as Jackie Robinson's generation, they were more just performance-based, just go out, play well, compete hard, and gain your position that way. But you had cats like Muhammad Ali said, well, you know what? I'm going to change my name. I'm going to change my religion. I'm going to be my own man. And in my dissertation research, I found that that tradition of being my own man was a product of Jack Johnson, because Jack Johnson came up in tradition of that new Negro after slavery. And another chapter I thought was particularly interesting in part of the class I'm teaching is how, you know, Wiggins talked about race, Black athletes, and the globalization of sport. And one of the things you see now is this complete shift, whereas in baseball, basketball, football, African Americans weren't allowed to play in the same way that Jack Johnson, for the longest time, had to chase a man around the world to get a title fight, because there was this racial notion of superiority that the, you know, white society was trying to safeguard, because if they competed and lost, then the demographics would shift as they have today. But then there's also been an issue with that, because has that damaged our perception of ourselves? Has it, you know, verified what some people thought as far as African Americans, you know, athletic prowess? And so there's different arguments about it. But also in this chapter, you see athletes taking their own stance again, where you have this globalization of sport, where you have superstars on a global level, like not only Magic Johnson, but you have Air Jordan, Allen Iverson, men who took, you know, certain things in society and fused it all together. And lastly, and we mentioned it as well, the altered landscape, where you have athletes again deciding to be their own people. You have Colin Kaepernick, you have LeBron James. And this past summer, or was it 2 summers ago, this year went by so fast, the George Floyd protests really, you saw an upkick in not only voices on the street, but voices of athletes, college athletes, Black, white, Asian, you name it, Hispanic. We all were coming together to say something about injustice. Even my own Washington football team ended up changing its name because of these type of protests, because voices were heard. And I think, again, Jack Johnson's story was the beginning, if you will, of the African-American experience in sport, if we go beyond slavery to the next level. And one of my favorite videos was Ken Burns's Unforgivable Blackness, because they rank him up there with one of the founding fathers, just like Thomas Jefferson.
Well, I put him first, but he was an artist, and artists leave artistic things behind, and the memories of Jack Johnson are memories of art.
I think the man was about movement, not just the movement in the ring, which he was a ballet master at, but movement in life. Don't pin me down. Don't lock me up. Don't embrace me to death. Don't use me as you. I don't see his life as a tragedy either. The scene was a tragedy. America was a tragedy that it couldn't cope with him. And I'd say, on a lesser degree, America was a tragedy in terms of race and racism. And we're still fighting about that. And we're still trying to get over that little pimple in our psyche.
I believe it was in the summer of 1968. I was writing a profile of Muhammad Ali, and he came to New York. This is during his exile. His license is revoked. His passport is seized. He can't get a fight anywhere. And he goes to see The Great White Hope on Broadway with James Earl Jones playing Jack Johnson in a spectacular prize-winning play. And I remember how affected Ali was by the play. There were obvious parallels. He's being prosecuted. Jack Johnson had been prosecuted. He's reviled by a segment of white society. Jack Johnson was reviled by almost all of white society. They're both extroverts. They both have extraordinary personalities. And I remember Ali coming out of the play, and a lot of TV cameras were there. And I remember him saying, I totally identify with Jack Johnson.
When Muhammad Ali came to see the play, he came backstage, he said, that's my story. He said, you take out the issue of the white women and replace that with the issue of religion. That's my story. He kept coming back. He kept bringing people back to see the play. That's my story.
I remember Bondini Brown, who was Muhammad Ali's corner man, just before Muhammad Ali, or perhaps even in the start of a fight, he would say, "Ghost in the house, ghost in the house. Jack Johnson's here, ghost in the house." And he sort of overrides boxing and indeed the whole culture that surrounds it, like some sort of a ghost in the house.
I would say in his way, on a far lower scale, Johnson is there with people like Lincoln, Thomas Edison, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong. These homemade guys. These guys whom you couldn't figure out that there's no recipe for. He's one of them. And he's the kind of a person who could only come about in the United States. Because America, for whatever its problems, still has a certain kind of elasticity and a certain latitude that allows the person to dream a big enough dream that can be achieved if the person is as big as the dream.
All right. So people, I'm done now. I'm sorry if that clip was too long, but I had to show it to you because again, Jack Johnson, his history, it just really impacts me in a great way. And I know it impacted Muhammad Ali, it impacted Joe Louis, it impacted all of African Americans in sports. And James Earl Jones isn't here, but I apologize for messing up his name at the beginning. Thank you.
Oh, Dr. Taylor, not too long at all. Oh my gosh. As a matter of fact, I was like, no, play more, don't stop, as you were doing your presentation. But I want to talk about the notion of celebrity and athletes. We know that that a person can become a celebrity on many, many platforms, acting, writing. But when we talk about athletes who become celebrities, what is it about being an athlete and a celebrity that really can impact these conversations about race and social change in such a powerful way? I'm thinking about this notion of disruption. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I think that athletes have a power. I think that, society, if you've always looked at it, even if you watch Spike Lee's Malcolm X movie, the African Americans were always crowded around radios to hear the Joe Louis fights. And it was because he represented something larger than himself. Society. I mean, Maya Angelou wrote about it. She wrote poems about how, when Joe Louis lost, it was like everybody took a knife to the heart because it was just so painful. And so when you see someone succeeding on that level, and then they decide to take up that platform and call out the government for injustices, decide to take a platform for social justice, that they have the power to mobilize everyone. LeBron James can send out a tweet or an Instagram post right now, and so many millions of people will see it, and he can have the power to change hearts and minds. And so I think that anyone who gains that platform has the potential to be a leader. And that's really what my dissertation was about.
And I'm going to take this in a little bit of a different direction, because I'm thinking about how society, in many times, and how the majority society, the status quo, can shape a narrative. I think I saw a shift around Misty Copeland. Even though she is a dancer, all of a sudden she was shifted into the realm of athleticism. And I remember when she did the Under Armour ad. What do you think that was about?
The Under Armour ad. Now, did she say something in particular in that? I need to.
No, it's not anything that she said in particular. I'm thinking more about how a narrative was actually shaped around her. Okay, here's a Black dancer. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that any other Black dancers or white dancers have been athleticized in the way that Misty Copeland has been athleticized. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And what do you think the psychology is behind that? Why do you think that narrative shifted in that way around Misty Copeland? What does race and politics have to do with that? You understand my question?
I do. I'm trying to wrap my head around. I wish I had seen the commercial freshly right now, but I think that, there's always a market and advertisers, right? Like if you did an Under Armour commercial, Venus and Serena have commercials. Advertising understands the psychology of people, and they understand how you can impact a large swath of people by showing someone that, you normally would not have shown. So, to athleticize this dancer, maybe they're trying to tap into a new market. I mean, it's all about marketing for the Fortune 500 companies.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, as a Black woman, it was interesting how the larger narrative could not just accept her as a beautiful dancer.
Mm.
But all of a sudden, we had to shift her to someone, well, she's really an athlete, because ballerinas aren't supposed to have muscles like what she has. Rather than saying, let's make this acceptable, let's give it a reason to exist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I could chime in on part of that, like Florence Joyner from way back. I wasn't even alive during that time, but the track athlete who made women running track sexy, right? She had her nails and her hair done. I mean, she's looking real good. But when you look at African American sports in a historical context, there was always an apprehension, especially from males, to have women competing on too high of a level because they thought it would make them masculine. And so now I think as a more open-minded society, we're getting away from that, and we're seeing that women can be feminine and be athletes.
Fascinating. I hate to move away from it, but we've got to get to Coach Allen here.
All right.
Coach Allen, Dr. Taylor gave us some great perspectives, around injustices regarding laws and policies governing athletes. So for yourself, as a former student athlete and now a coach, how is this relevant to the collegiate experience?
Well, even, and if you will allow me to expand a little bit beyond just college athletics, I think that now we are in an age where social media is one of the most powerful tools. So one of the things that student athletes are in contact with the most is their phones. And what is on their phones? Their social media accounts. So they're seeing all of the different occurrences that are taking place, whether it is an injustice, a race injustice, or they are seeing the social movements that different athletes are taking themselves, whether they are choosing to protest in the form of sitting out of a game, or they are standing up for against the mistreatments that they have faced, whether it be in the athletic departments, or if they are just being a consumer in a market, not even in a market or just a store. A lot of college athletics and having the ability to have so much more access, especially compared to when I was in school, it is allowing student athletes to become more aware and use their platform, no matter how small, whether they are at a smaller Division III school or they are at a Power 5 Division I school, using their platforms to bring attention to the issues that are that affect them on a daily basis. I would like to even highlight the WNBA, how they dedicated an entire season to entire season to social justice. So their social, or the justice movement, that was their platform, they utilized that and brought so much attention. And one could argue that it was more attention that they had in the past, regardless of how great of athletes they had been, regardless of how good the games were. Them utilizing their social justice, this justice movement, kind of propelled them into a different area of being noticed. The social justice movement, even if you're looking at the Atlanta Dream, again, the Atlanta Dream was one team that went extremely hard for whatever they believed in. They even called out they even called out their owner about some of the things they were not pleased with. And this young lady was actually a senator. And as a result of that, many would argue that the politics and race and sports didn't have anything to do with it. But we all know that because of the influence of the WNBA, Ralph Warnock is now a senator in Georgia.
What are some of the risks you think, and I'm taking it back to the college level, student athletes face when they decide it's time for us to speak up and to protest versus being someone who has a lucrative income
Absolutely.
and speaks up?
I think one of the biggest risks and that may be what is some of the hindrance or the hesitation for student athletes is because they may fear that, they don't want to disappoint administration or even their coaches if they believe differently from their coaches, having the risk of having their scholarships taken away, even though you cannot do that per the rules. It may open up a chain of events that they just did not bargain for when all they wanted to do was bring attention to an issue that affects them deeply.
Not to mention what I like to call the hidden minds that are out in the field, okay? Because you may have a professor who is just very upset about what you are voicing, and they may not have anything to do with your athletic department, but they can certainly give you a grade that can certainly put your scholarship at risk.
Absolutely.
How do we help students to address those kinds of issues? What kind of support is out there for students if they find themselves in a situation like that?
Well, and not exactly that situation, but I always tell my student athletes in particular to keep a record of everything. Anytime there is a dispute, anytime you want to call something into question, make sure you have the evidence to support that, because it is very easy to put a grade into a system and there not be any call in question and it just be accepted. And that grade, if you're receiving a D or F, will absolutely affect your eligibility. So if you are keeping track, and they love to screenshot everything in this generation, that would be one of the things that is most beneficial, so that you are you're able to fight against anything or any unfairness that may be a result of you voicing your opinion or your beliefs.
Thank you for that. So Dr. Pickney, I know you're still here with us. W.E.B. Du Bois is quoted as saying, "The reason Jack Johnson was so beset by his own country, a country ironically which had only recently affirmed that all men were created equal, was because of his unforgivable blackness." Your work, From Slave Ships to Scholarships, The Plight of the Black Athlete, delves into the past and current affairs of the Black athlete to include social development, politics, empowerment, forgiveness, and acceptance. How does the story of Jack Johnson fit into this space?
Well, I think Dr. Dale did an excellent job, and Jack Johnson is one of those names that is synonymous with the Black experience of an athlete. Naturally, we skip forward and go to Muhammad Ali and what he did, Jim Brown and those guys, Jesse Owens and the other guys who broke the race barriers. But Jack Johnson is that true father of race. Going back to what Dr. Taylor said, he just infuriated white people by flaunting white women in their faces, as well as beating white men half to death. And, the politics of that is white America was not going to go for that. Therefore, that's when all the politics and legislation came into place to change the structure of sports. But as we look at here again, the title of my book, From Slave Ships to the Scholarships, as we look at the formation of sports in America, it started on our plantations, where you had one cotton farmer, one corn farmer using slaves to gather crops in a sporting event, where you would pit one plantation versus another plantation. So it's deep rooted. We're deep rooted into our African history, as well as the sports and the plantation and slavery. I've got a little short video that I want to show you to kind of highlight some of the aspects of the book. But we had 10 exciting chapters in this book, Mayor. And the first one is from the slave ships to the plantation to the scholarships. And the reason we threw the scholarships in there because I try to tell a lot of young people in my position as an NCAA faculty athletic rep, which is to protect the academic and athletic integrity of intercollegiate athletics. And going back to something Ms. Allen says, and then the question you asked in terms of how do we protect student athletes, that's my job to make sure that the institution or the coaches or any one of these student athletes not being abused or violated from a legislative standpoint or a political standpoint. There's also the issue of making sure no proper benefits are being offered in reference to giving anybody a heads up. But the book also wanted to capitalize on the fact that the HBCU community is such a low resource community for athletics. And one of my chapters, it talks about the historical significance of Black colleges and universities. But the central question that I ask, and I'm asking these college presidents, are you participating in something you really cannot afford? Because when we look at our resources compared to, Catawba or UNC Charlotte or Chapel Hill, or even A&T's resources compared to a Duke, or a Fayetteville State compared to an NC State. It's just not the same. And there was an interesting interview that Edwin Moses gave 2 weeks ago or several weeks ago on Joe Madison. He talked about the importance of HBCUs and how, from a legislative standpoint, from a political standpoint, how the NCAA has pretty much destroyed some of our HBCUs by taking away the superstar Black athletes who don't want to come to an institution that has, a smaller cafeteria. They don't have a bowling alley. They don't have the comfortability in terms of these state-of-the-art stadiums and soft grass that they could just fall out on. Whereas you come to an institution that barely has a locker room, and barely has a good gym, the cafeteria and the food. So what Edwin Moses' argument was, you're robbing these institutions of bringing in these Black athletes to keep that tradition going. So that says a lot. One of the other chapters I want to talk about was, is there a role for the Black gay sports athlete, the Black gay male athlete in sports? And that's a very political issue because the NFL and the NBA really don't want to deal with that. But we're at an age and time now where we have to deal with it because this is the reality of what we're dealing with. Coaches, we're seeing at an earlier age from a developmental standpoint, these characteristics are coming out. Two of the other chapters were the Black women and athletes. And we talk about people like Thea Gibson, who paved the way for Venus and Serena. Thea Gibson was actually born and raised about 15 minutes from where I grew up in South Carolina, a little town called Silver, South Carolina, right off of I-95. Born to a very poor community. As a result, she moved to New York City, dropped out of high school. You know the other histories in terms of Thea Gibson. There's another chapter about Black sportscasters. Miss Mia, can you tell me who was the first female Black sportscaster to be on NFL Today?
Now, see, you would put me on the spot like that. I cannot.
I know you know Jane Kennedy.
Oh my gosh! Yes.
You remember Jane Kennedy?
I remember
right?
Jane Kennedy. Yes.
All right, so she was actually one of the first Black females to be on TV before Robin Roberts, before Jamel Hill, before Stage Steele. So I have a chapter talking about 14 outstanding females in sports. But what I wanted that chapter to do was to inspire maybe the next group of young African-American females to say, hey, I can be part of this group. Because here again, you talk about the politics, the sexism, and the racism in sports. Because there's 14 young ladies I talk about in the book, but they're like 75 or 80 or 90 white women. And they have a list of the top 64 female sportscasters, and we only have 4 women in that list out of 63. Okay, but there may be a 6 or 7-year-old who may read that particular chapter and say, okay, I want to be the next Stage Steele, the next Robin Roberts. I end the chapter talking about Robin Roberts and where she came from, the way she is today. And chapter 5 talks about the academic problem. Here again, the politics of academics, eligibility. Are we keep, and we know from a racial standpoint, football and basketball are where we had our poorest academic problems. Football and basketball is dominated by Negroes, right? Black people. So in our major schools, major universities, they're not graduating. But the HBCU, I just had a conference call with Forrest on Tuesday about our graduation rate. When we are not graduating 60% of our student athletes, I consider that to be failing. So if we're graduating 55%, 45%, or 35%, we're not doing a good job.
Right.
So if I could share my screen, I know we're short for time. I want to share you a quick video about the book.
Yes, please do. Please do. And while you're bringing that up, gentlemen, will you please put in the chat how we can get your books? I don't think we have sound on your video, Dr. Pickney.
We don't?
Mm-mm.
Maybe beyond my control.
When you share a screen, you have to also share audio.
Gotcha.
Okay. So if you don't mind, can you rewind your video and just start it over?
I do that.
Okay.
How do I share the audio?
Go back to share screen. When you go to share screen, it's going to be a little check. Well, a little box you can check on the left-hand side at the bottom where it says share audio.
All right, let me where we are. I'm on my share screen.
Okay. You should see a little.
Hitting share.
You see a little check box at the bottom left when you have the options for what part of the screen you want to share.
I see it. Wait a minute. Viewing the screenshot.
Share audio with screen.
I just see new share. Share audio. I don't see it.
It should be at the bottom left. There's those little boxes that show you share this, share that. Should be a little box that says share audio.
I'm having a hard time finding it, Taylor.
Oh.
Dr. Pickney?
Yeah, can the technical person jump in and do it for me?
If you would stop sharing your screen first.
All right.
Stop sharing.
Gotcha.
Open it back up where you're sharing your screen. Now at the bottom, before you click on the screen to share, at the bottom it should say share original sound or optimize your video. Click on that at the bottom on the left hand.
I see where it says. I see where it says. Which one? Both of them or just one?
Just click on both.
All right, gotcha. Now go back and hit my screen.
You should be able to do what you need to do.
All right, thank you. Can you hear it now, guys?
Yes, sir.
Cool. Thank you.
Don't fool yourself. You know, but look in the mirror. Don't obey his Lord.
I just wanna talk. We went from slave ships to scholarships, from plantation policies to modern politics, with a broken sense of belonging to breaking records and ambitions of being an owner. Blinded by the fact that we still chattel to the masters. Professional hoop dreams is what we after. They putting bread behind us when them cleats lacing, but a torn ACL will lose your education. Just be clear, I ain't here to bash. Get in where you fit in, but I'm here to ask. What happened when we stepped out of the fields and let the bags drop? We always been the real cash crop. Rail got hands, D got handles. J quick as lightning if he ever pass you. So they cashing in on our ability, paying top dollar for the speed and the agility. But they've been doing that since the Gold Coast. We've been incredible athletes since before a host, or a commentator, or a translator. We always had the upper hand even before they paid us. Make this clear, I'm proud of what we've achieved, but I know there's so much more in store. If we make it common thought to actually believe that scholarship don't mean scholar education ain't degrees. Go get them though, use it to your advantage, to gain more knowledge and do more building so we can ultimately control the institution that we choose to educate us and our children.
All right, so I don't know if you guys could pick up some of the link. We have a SoundCloud video, music file that goes with the book. And Mayor Higgins, I'll send a couple of books over to Dr. Parrish and to just give out to you guys. And you guys, it'd be great if you guys pick this book up next year for the big read, Parrish. It'd be a good read. And I would love to maybe put this book out in the community in Salisbury as well.
That will be such a wonderful community read. Oh my gosh, we pick a chapter and go for it.
Any comments about the video in terms of because the last thing it ended, and I want to end this and say that the scholarship, what a lot of people are really fighting for is really not a scholarship. This is where the political politics, it's a contract. It's a contract to perform, a contract to serve. And if you underperform and underserve, they will not renew that contract. They just let you go.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't wait to see your book. I can't wait to read both of these books, actually. The video was very enlightening. I'm so glad you shared that with us. There's something you touched on when you were speaking. You were talking about gay men in politics, in sports. What about the challenges that transgendered athletes are facing right now?
Especially, well, I'm glad you asked that question, because the NCAA, here again through politics and legislation, has been ahead of the game. They're very inclusive with that. Problem is, we don't have everybody else who is inclusive with it. And when I say that, you have a lot of people who don't understand the politics and the legislation behind it.
Thank you. Yeah, we are very close to the noonday hour, and so I want to go ahead and jump to hearing some final remarks from our panelists. So Dr. Taylor, what are some of your final remarks that you'd like to share with us?
On a les portraits de... Hold on. Oh, goodbye. Okay, I'm back. All right, so I really appreciated both what Shannon and Dr. Pickney said. I mean, it was great, and I think that Dr. Pickney and I, we're on the same level. We've been talking about the same thing. Even that James Brown song he played at the beginning of that video, I played that as the intro to my dissertation. So a little bit of James Brown, I love it. And the scholarship thing, that's true, right? When I was at Lenore Ryan, I did the data and I looked at it. A lot of our African-American men, we were the SAC champions in football. A lot of our African-American men, if they did not play football, basketball, or run track, they didn't even stay at the school past freshman year. And so you're right, that scholarship thing. I had gentlemen in my class who, if the coach didn't like them, they didn't get to play as much, they lost motivation for everything else at the school. And, you said it. They come to school, they look around. If you don't have a turf field, you don't have brand new workout facility, they don't even want to come. And so some of these Black athletes now saying, go back to HBCUs, I think it's the right time to renew those calls.
Yes, did you want to respond to that in any way, Dr. Pickney?
Yeah, I make some excellent points, and tell we do need to get together and work on some things together. The other issue is you got young men right now who are telling coaches how much you're gonna pay me and my family to come play. So the whole politics games have changed again in terms of the money value. And I keep telling people, March Madness is gonna be a great example, but it's the big deal with March Madness. Watch the concert. Watch the commercials. That's where the money is. When you look at March Madness and they're going to pay CBS $36 million for 3 weeks of TV games, follow the commercials, follow the money. That's the real politics.
Wow. Coach Allen.
In responding to what Dr. Pickney said and having a lot of Black athletes ask the coaches, oh, how much are you bringing? That very well may be taking place, and a lot of it will forever be gone uncovered. But I really wanted to bring attention how we are definitely seeing a shift especially with Deion Sanders having coached at, or is the coach at Jackson State, how we are seeing a lot more top tier 4-star, 5-star football players that are transferring into the HBCU. And yes, this is one where we are seeing they are getting a lot of attention, but hopefully this creates a trickle down effect so that the smaller schools and even the schools that don't have an Hall of Famer as a football coach, and even in Livingstone having a former NFL player as a coach, that we are continuing to, that other athletes are continuing to shift back to the HBCUs where they will be appreciated and not just treated as the name on a contract and that's it.
I have really enjoyed this discussion today, and I just really appreciate you all allowing me to come and be your moderator. Dr. Taylor, Dr. Pickney, Coach Allen, wow, what great insight. Dr. Parrish, thank you for putting this together. It has been wonderful. You know, from the non-athlete in the room. I did play softball in high school, and I sat on the bench a lot, but that was okay. My daddy came to every game. And there was one game he came to, and the coach put me in. I was over in right field, and I threw somebody out at third base. You thought I had won the World Series. He was so excited. So thank you so much for this. The Big Read has been a great event here in our community, and I want to thank Livingstone College for doing this and for bringing the Big Smoke to our attention. It has also been a very interesting read. I want to thank the Rowan County Public Library, all of the Rowan Salisbury participants, and thank you to the National Endowment of the Arts and Midwest Arts for making opportunities possible. Opportunities like this to have such powerful discussions. Dr. Parrish, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Again, thank you so much for joining Rowan County's Big Read. And we just encourage you all to remember Livingstone College and lift us up today as we remember our student DeAndre Anderson. And that's going to take place actually right now, our vigil service at 12 o'clock noon. So again, thank you all so much for joining the county's Big Read program, and make it a great Blue Bear Day.